we go to 2023. I spent the first couple of months of 2023 working, prepping the car, making sure that I had a plan built out. And the first plan was huge, and the second plan was smaller, and the third plan was even smaller. And then the van blew up in February or so. I guess we'll get there in a minute. So what I'm gonna do is there's two video. They put out a video very kindly. I should add, I'm very grateful to them for putting the work into doing a full video on a Lemon's World for the Vannonball. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let them tell some story and then get to a race, and then we'll go back to the race wrap up and we'll watch that video and then bounce between the two. This will be the beginning of the Vannonball video, and then we'll bounce between that and race wrap-ups. I'll be completely honest, I've watched this video at least 3 dozen times. I love nothing more than validation.
We've said this before, but when we sat down and created the 24 Hours of Lemons, we had no idea how far people would take this basic idea.
Yeah, that's true. And in a lot of our marketing and social media, that's just showing off something ridiculous that you, our participants, have done.
And some people take that inspiration and take it to completely ridiculous heights. Zach Caldwell.
I can't believe how terrible this outfit is. The idea was the Great American Road Trip. It was a bunch of frat boys going on a road trip in a minivan. We're just gonna bro out, and it was a great theme. It was super easy for all my drivers to dress to. Everybody got it. Nobody cared about the theme. And what it did mean is that I wore this beer, barbecue, and freedom muscle shirt without enough panache to make it clear that it's ironic. And this is not an outfit I should ever have been videoed wearing.
Zach is from Kentucky, and he showed up out of nowhere.
I feel a little bit bad that immediately they identify as that I'm from Kentucky. And again, that's how I'm looking. I feel worse that this gentleman, Randy Post, who is a very, very, very seriously good, actually famous race car driver, shares the screen with me, who looks and smells like I've been sleeping in a van for a week.
In his 2006 Dodge Caravan, which, as you should know by now, excites us Lemon staffers roughly 6,000% more than your Gulf-themed 944.
Yeah, his team was called Rad Dad Racing, which of course is a nod to the family hauler minivan thing, and he went on to finish in the middle of a 100-car field at Road Atlanta, beating a whole bunch of faster cars in the process.
Let's talk about that for a second. My goal is always to finish top half-ish, knowing that the van will always be slower around the track than pretty much every car there.
At some point during the winter after that race, he came up with the name Vannonball. On a more personal note, Zach was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult and describes himself, quote, as chronically disorganized, forgetful, and impulsive, and top to toes the last person you want managing or prepping a race car.
I should not be in charge of things, but nobody else was racing a minivan, and I decided I needed that to happen more than I needed sanity.
So he deserves tons of credit for jumping headfirst into an activity that challenges all of those characteristics immediately.
There's an old joke I remember back in like 2007, 2008, when people first started getting smartphones, and it's like smartphones are like a boat. You don't really want one, but you want a friend who has one. And what I've learned is I don't have executive functioning, but I have friends that do. And those friends have learned to avoid me when I start talking about the race car.
We try to provide a welcoming atmosphere where you can test yourself without worrying too much about getting a few things wrong along the way.
I want to back up what Nick is saying here. I have never once felt like people didn't respect the van, the effort I put into racing it, the time that I spend on this, because I'm not fast, because we're not winning races or anything like that. Often people are as amused by me just getting there as anybody else is getting winning a Class A or an IOE. This community has not just accepted me, but thoroughly, I feel, celebrated a lot of the time when I show up, and people are expecting the van. People I've never met, people I have never heard of. The grapevine has told them an idiot and a race van is coming, and look forward to it. You don't have to be perfect or even good at anything in this world to just put a cage in a car, show up, and if you're not a jerk, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna have a good time, you're gonna make friends, and you're gonna learn a lot fast.
You just can't take this thing too seriously. I mean, look at what you're going to be racing against.
That computer-controlled bagpipe thing on the side of a car is among the cooler uses of hardware I've ever seen, and is still the most annoying thing I have ever been within 20 feet of.
Now, the van itself is a 2006 Dodge Caravan, as we said, and it was bought by Zach's family when it was about a year old. And they also used it to store and haul hay for Zach's mom's therapeutic horseback riding clinic.
There was still straw in it when I was stripping it for the cage. There was still straw in it when it raced the first time.
Zach had this idea of road tripping this van from Lemons Race to Lemons Race, and when we released the 2023 schedule, there were 3 back-to-back race weekends in a row, and he figured, why not do 3 in a row?
At first it was going to be like 6, and a full New York to LA, red ball to Portofino cannonball. Yeah. And then I ran the budget on it and thought, yes, I can do this. And then there was no way I could do it.
Why not do 3 in a row? And as we mentioned, before that, he raced it a couple of times in 2022, and it ran flawlessly.
Flawlessly.
So it was gonna be ready for this marathon of a bunch of races back to back.
I 100% believed it was going to be ready to go. Yeah.
This kind of mechanical success came despite, or maybe because of, the fact the van is completely stock with a 3.8 liter pushrod V6, automatic transmission, and the factory suspension.
In preparation for the 3 races in 3 weekends, the Vannonball, Zach started recruiting people across the country on the Lemons Forum. Things were really coming together nicely, that is, until a few weeks before the first race at Thunderhill, when he pulled the van out of storage for a quick shakedown run.
A few weeks is a little bit off. It was 2.5 months, and we ordered an engine, and we were told it would be there in 2 weeks. And 3.5 weeks later, they said, great, good news, your engine's on its way. It's going to be 3 to 4 weeks. And then I had to absolutely scramble.
It started overheating, smoking, and finally died on the side of the road, refusing to turn over.
He hiked back to his house, got a tractor, towed the van back, discovered that he had forgotten to drain the water out of the motor over the winter.
Eric's face here is both absolutely correct and hurts my feelings immensely.
Blew out a freeze plug, the engine overheated, it cooked the cylinder heads, maybe cracked the block. Well, it was toast.
This led to a frantic search for a replacement motor, which got swapped in at the 11th hour.
By way of Detroit. We towed the van to Detroit, came back 2 weeks later, picked up the van, and because we didn't know if it was going to work, my dad actually followed me. If you can imagine this in your head, we towed a second truck up. Yes, that's right. We took the car hauler with a second truck on it to Detroit. Because the plan was, if the van did not run when we got to Detroit, I was going to throw the van on the trailer, take it to California, and my father was going to drive his truck that we had trailered to Detroit back home. My father is 73 years old. He is as insane as I am, and I can't believe he did this for me, but he...
And Zach set out for California from Kentucky with a van full of tools and camping gear, with an unproven vehicle, some drivers he'd met on the internet, and thousands of miles of driving and racing after the very first event that he hadn't gotten to yet.
There's two stories that need to be told about the trip from Detroit to Thunderhill. The first is Nebraska. So I took off from Detroit, made it to Chicago the first day. The second day, I made it as far as Lincoln, Nebraska, just outside of Omaha. I pulled off to grab breakfast, Gatorades. I think clean socks was on the list for some reason. I was out of socks, or I didn't pack enough socks or something. But I stopped at the Walmart, and I hopped out, and I ran into Walmart, and took about half an hour, hopped back in, expecting to turn on and hit the road and have a nice long day of Nebraska. At which point, the van didn't start. And I put out an all call. It was the second day of the trip, third day of the trip, and I was already calling people for help, which was disappointing, but people came through. Tom Webb reaches out to me and says he's not close, but if I need to be saved, he's coming to save me. Drove 4 hours to come meet me in the parking lot of a Walmart and help me diagnose this problem. And what we found it was, after everything, was in getting in and out of the car, I kept kicking the wires I had spliced in the ignition, and they had come loose enough that the security device in the key wasn't registering and the car wasn't allowing itself to start. So I looked at him, and it was late already, and I was thinking that I needed to get some miles done because I still had a long way to go. 1,572 miles, and it was Tuesday night, and I needed to be there by Thursday evening. And I looked at him, and he very wisely told me to get a hotel room, get some rest, wake up early, and do a long day tomorrow instead of a long night tonight. And that was very good advice. I woke up, I threw some Bruce Springsteen on, thinking that Nebraska would make Nebraska better. It did not. Nebraska is miserable to drive through. I do not recommend it. It was horrendously boring. And got to see the Bonneville Salt Flats and drive on the Bonneville Salt Flats. And while I was out there, I ran into these three motorcycle tourists from Germany that were having a trip. And we traded phones and photos and got video of each other driving along. The other story about California is crossing into the border on I-80 is the Donner Pass, the Donner Party, right? It's about 3,500 feet elevation, and it was May 20th, May 19th, May 20th, and it started thundersnowing. It was 35 degrees. I had just left Utah in May. I had been in Nebraska, and it wasn't warm, but it was comfortable. I was in flip-flops, and then I was in thundersnow, and I didn't have my windshield wipers working because I am dumb and planned poorly. And the other thing that I had planned poorly is that all of my camping gear was on top of all of my tools and not readily accessible. I thought I had a toolkit with stuff that I needed, but I was wrong. I had a 1/4-inch drive and some of the bare basic necessity sockets, but I did not have the 11/16, if I recall correctly, that I needed. I had an 11/16 socket. I did not have the 3/8 drive to drive it. I had to find my stubby adjustable wrench and put it into the socket and then twist that to put the windshield wiper back on the axle. While thundersnow is happening and I'm just barely off the shoulder because I can't see enough out at that point to know where I am safely between mountain and white line of traffic lane. So like I'm getting whipped by semis. I am terrified that California Highway Patrol is going to come by and want to talk to me about the various things that I have going on and have a discussion about the roadworthiness of my vehicle. But with zip ties and that weird socket thing, I managed to get it handled, and I got enough windshield wiper action that I could see enough road to safely come down flashers 35 miles an hour, just to get down enough that I was out of the storm, and then clean everything off, readjust my windshield wipers again for a little bit more security. But I did. I drove through it, and we got to Thunderhill, and wouldn't you believe it, I got to Thunderhill right about 8 p.m. on Thursday.
Zach rolled into Thunderhill just in time for tech, met his drivers, and was ready to start race 1 of 3 in a row.
So let's do the Thunderhill wrap up.
As you may know, we always have a special award at each race. It's often themic or geographic. Well, those can be hard to come up with. Not this time. This time it went to Zach. We called it the Long Distance Dumb AF Minivan Idiot Award. Unless you think we're capping on Zach.
The emphasis with which Jay Lamb hits capping.
We love dumb AF behavior like this.
So the two people in this shot besides me are Randy Popst and Kim Harmon. Kim, who is the coolest human and the sweetest person I know, and Randy Popst, who I've already said, very serious race car driver. And then there's this.
Yes, I mean, that is perfectly lemons. After this race, Zach got back in his 2006.
I need to go back and look at Kim's face again on that scene. Just a second. Like,
It's perfectly
she clearly is terrified, right?
lemons. Grand Caravan drove straight to HPR for the race at HPR the following weekend, and as soon as that was done, drove straight to New Jersey for the race the weekend after that. 3 weekends, driving the Grand Caravan to each race, dumb AF in the best possible way. I was at Thunderhill and I didn't see the van start the race, but a few hours after the green flag, I wandered over to the paddock spot and I found Zach looking totally spent in the driver's seat.
I remember this happening a little bit differently, but largely the same. And I actually talked to Nick about this after. I wanted him to know that I wanted him to talk about it or mention it and include it as part of the story, that I didn't want him to not talk about it out of concern for my pride. This happens, and apparently it happens more often than people realize. But the other thing I'm going to talk about will become more clear in a moment.
Figured it was a combination of the frantic engine swap, cross-country drive.
Just look at me. I clearly am not a thin man, but I have never looked that bad. I am not sure what's going on, but I am as bloated and as sick as I've ever seen myself. And I think that's a mixture of altitude, 5 days of nonstop fast food, a lot of insomnia, and I was probably hungover because I probably partied pretty hard that night. So the panic attack happened because I was so uncomfortable in my gear and my seat and the Hans device that I felt like I was choking. I felt like I had a claustrophobic panic attack. And I am very, very grateful to my team, the guys that week that handled it so well, and with Nick and all of them who made it clear that, like, we're not embarrassed about this. This isn't a thing I'm ashamed of. It happens, and it's part of the learning experience. And I'm just so grateful to everybody who was so cool, and nobody tried to force me back into that car until I was ready.
So I said something to the effect of, "Hey man, I guess you're all wiped out and you finally earned a break." And he said, "Nope, I actually haven't gone out yet."
Turns out that once he was fully suited and strapped in, he had a full-blown claustrophobic panic attack, which actually happens more than you'd think in Lemons.
The other way to see that story is that I have spent a week trying to get a race car to the racetrack, and I finally sit in it, and I have the first panic attack of my life. And 5 seconds into that panic attack, Nick Pond rounds the corner of the A-pillar of the van with a camera and just has it straight on me.
But he said his crew of internet arrive and drives were super helpful and supportive. After some water, assurance from his teammates, and an updated head and neck device that was a little less like a seat collar, Zach was ready to hit the track finally. 2 days of racing later, the Vannonball completed its first race of the 3 in 88th place out of 120.
From Thunderhill, it was on to High Plains in Colorado,